this song today. Oh, oh, yes. Jesus, you are the greatest man I know. Let's put our hands together. Let's worship the Lord this morning. Jesus is the greatest man I know. Oh, Jesus is the greatest man I know. May the moon, stars, the land, the sea, redemptive man of authority. Jesus is the greatest man I know. Jesus is the worthy Lamb of God. Jesus is the worthy Lamb of God. That is why we bow before your throne, knowing you are God alone. Jesus is the greatest man I know. Oh, yes you are. Oh, Jesus, yeah. Jesus is the greatest man I know. Yeah, Jesus is the greatest man I know. May the moon, the stars, the land, the sea, redemptive man of authority. Jesus is the greatest man I know. The worthy Lamb of God. Yes, you are. Jesus is the worthy Lamb of God. That is why we bow before your throne, knowing you are God alone. Jesus is the greatest man I know. Oh, oh. He's the greatest man I know. Oh, oh. He's the greatest man I know. Oh, the greatest man I know. Jesus is the Lamb that was slain. Jesus is the Lamb that was slain. Oh, he hung and bled and crucified. By his own he was denied. Jesus is the greatest man I know. See, oh, oh, he's the greatest man I know. Oh, oh, he's the greatest man I know. Oh, the greatest man I know. Oh, he's the greatest man I know. Oh, he's the greatest man I know. Oh, the greatest man I know. The greatest man I know. Shout it out. Greatest man I know. Greatest man I know. Greatest man I know. Nobody like our God. Nobody like our God. Nobody like our God. The greatest man I know. Nobody like our God. Nobody like our God. Jesus. Nobody like our God. You are the greatest man I know. Nobody like our God. Nobody like our God. Nobody like our God. The greatest man I know. Nobody like our God. Nobody like our God. Nobody like our God. The greatest man I know. You are great, Lord, and you are mighty this morning. Let's continue to worship him. He is great and greatly to be praised. Amen. Let's sing it. We your name. There's something we cannot explain that happens when we proclaim your great name. Your great name is King Jesus. No other name, King Jesus. No stronger we can call on you. Things change, yeah, when we call on your name. We love to call your name. There's something we cannot explain that happens when we proclaim your great name. Your great name is King Jesus. No other name, King Jesus. No stronger we can call on you. Things change, yeah, when we call on your name. King Jesus, King Jesus. No other name, King Jesus. No stronger we can call on you. Things change, yeah, when we call on your name.
Power in the name of Jesus. Power in your name.
Sing that together, sing it. There is power in the name of Jesus. Power in your name. There is power in the name of Jesus. Power in your name. Things change. Things change when we call you Jesus. Things change when we call your name. Things change when we call you Jesus. Things change when we call your name. I'm free when I call you Jesus. I'm free when I call your name. I'm free when I call you Jesus. I'm free when I call your name. When I call your name.
When I call your name.
When I call your name.
When I cry out to my Father.
When I call your name.
When I call your name.
When I call your name. Yes. When we call your name, things change, Lord Jesus. Yes. If you believe that He is an awesome God, let's sing this together. Yeah, our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. King Jesus, King Jesus. No other name, King Jesus. None stronger we can call on you. Things change, yeah, when we call on your name. Oh, King Jesus. No other name, King Jesus. None stronger we can call on you. Things change, yeah, when we call on your name. Oh, call
We're
on the
so
name.
glad to see you in the house of the Lord here today, and we welcome you to this baccalaureate service. It's a unique time. And it's a great time at the same time, and we honor the work that our graduates have done. So to our graduates who are seated all the way across the front, and they're diligently reading their names and their accomplishments even as I am speaking, which is pretty much what they were doing when they were in school while the teacher was teaching, right? They were doing something else the entire time. But we are so thankful that they are here. Class of 2020, you did it. In fact, let me try that again and see if I get a little echo from the crowd out there. Class of 2020, you did it. And after all, why shouldn't you? You are the 9/11 generation. On September the 11th, 2001, most of you were still in your mother's womb. The class of 2020 is the first official graduating class of high school seniors born after the terrorist attacks of September the 11th. You were born in a very unusual season, those of you who are high school graduates. And here you are now, almost 19 years later, graduating in another very unusual season. The season of COVID-19, the season of face masks, quarantines, riots, and online church services. But you, the class of 2020, both college and high school graduates, were born for this moment. God has built you for such a time as this. And I know up close and personal, especially since one of your fellow classmates is my daughter, Heidi, that this is not the way that you wanted to go out. Without proms, without award ceremonies, unfinished sports seasons, and especially without the traditional commencement exercises in the Coliseum with your fellow seniors from all over the county. But do not for a second underestimate your value. Do not underestimate your value, though you didn't get to finish out your senior year like other generations. And I want to challenge you, do not feel sorry for yourselves. Don't underestimate your value in God's plan, because God has built you for this moment. Most of you are what is known as Generation Z. And you're Gen Z, and you're Gen Z for a reason, because you are a transition generation. Your presence actually helped move us from the 20th century into the 21st century. And you have been built by God for such a time as this. Each of you graduates, high school and college, are in a transition stage even at this very moment. And I know this is not necessarily the way you wanted to transition. But thankfully, you're not the first ones to wrestle with having to transition in less than desirable conditions. In the scriptures, the likes of Joseph, Daniel, Esther, and Jesus, and so many others, all went on to impact their generations despite having faced less than desirable transitions. At the age of 16, for example, Joseph had big dreams. For the next 14 years, however, he was thrown into pits, slavery, and prisons. Yet God used those painful transitions to propel Joseph into the role of prime minister in a foreign land, the foreign land of Egypt. And from that position, God used Joseph to save the world from famine. As teenagers, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were all human trafficked, ripped away from their parents and transported to a nation that had invaded their nation and destroyed it. They were transported to a nation where they didn't even speak the language. Yet God used those painful transitions to elevate them so high that even Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, knew them by their first names and trusted them as his advisors. As a teenager, the beautiful Esther was sexually trafficked and forced to sleep with the most powerful man in the kingdom against her will. Yet, unbeknownst to Esther, God would strategically turn that humiliating transition into an opportunity for her to become the queen of the Persian Empire. That humiliating transition put her into position where she was able to save the entire Jewish race from ethnic cleansing. Esther grew to realize that she had come into the kingdom for such a time as this. Esther grew to realize that she had been built for that moment. Each of those godly men and women grew to realize that though less than desirable was their transition, even humiliating was their transition, that they had actually been brought into the kingdom for such a time as this. And they have been built for this moment. And so you, class of 2020, I say again, you have been built for this moment, right now, right here. You have come into the kingdom for such a time as this. So just before you walk across the stage of this baccalaureate service in just a few moments and into the future that God has prepared for you, there's a principle I want you to walk out with. It's Jesus' principle of combining being wise as serpents with being harmless as doves. Being wise as serpents as you walk out of here, and yet being harmless as doves. In Matthew chapter 10 and verse 16, Jesus is just about to transition a group of his young proteges, his young apostles, out into the world. And he says these words, "Behold, I send you out into the world as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore, be wise as serpents and harmless as doves." Four things Jesus teaches us here. He teaches us, one, he's sending you out on mission for him. Remember that. He's sending you out today on mission for him. Number two, remember, he's sending you out in the midst of wolves. And so number three, you are to be wise as serpents. And number four, you are to be harmless as doves. Class of 2020, Jesus is sending you out into the world on mission for him. I know you may think that you are graduating and you've got all your plans figured out. And that's great. But don't forget that underneath your plans are God's purposes. I wonder if there's anybody out there who would be able to lift a hand and say, you know what, I had a lot of plans coming out of high school, but I recognize something. That underneath my plans always are God's purposes. Can you raise your hand? It turned out differently. How many of you raise your hand and say, you had no idea you would be where you are right now? Would you just lift that hand? You had no way of seeing that. Solomon, the wisest man to ever live during the Old Testament times, wrote these words in Proverbs 19 and 21. Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it's the Lord's purpose that prevails. Jesus is sending you out on mission for him. Or maybe you're graduating and you're not exactly sure what your next move is. And that's okay too, because Jesus is sending you out on mission for him. So whenever you land, and wherever you land, the college world or the career world, Jesus is the one who has sent you out on mission for him. This is what Jesus has been doing for 2,000 years, isn't it? Sending his followers out on mission for him to extend God's kingdom of righteousness, to extend his kingdom of peace and joy into the world. And how do we do that? By making disciples, more disciples of Jesus Christ. And according to Jesus, the two greatest ways for his followers to make more disciples is by demonstrating to others what Jesus said to do in Matthew 22, 37 through 39. He said, let people know that you love God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength. And let people seeing you love your neighbor as yourself. So in every decision you make in life, ask yourself these two questions. Am I loving God with this decision? Just think about that. Am I loving God with this decision that I'm about to make? And the second question that you can ask yourself is this. Am I loving my neighbor as myself with this decision? Or said differently, how am I bringing greater worship to our God? And how am I bringing greater well-being to our world? Class of 2020, never forget, Jesus is sending you out into the world on mission for him. Wherever it is that you go, whatever career you end up with, while you are doing that, God has already sent you out on mission. And underlying your other missions that you do in life, you have the mission to make disciples for Him. Secondly, class of 2020, Jesus is sending you out as sheep among wolves. And you know what sheep are? Sheep are defenseless. You know what wolves are? They are predators. They are out to eat you alive. Jesus said that's what they want to do. They want to make prey of you. When He was sending out His apostles, He said, I'm sending you out as sheep among wolves, and I promise you they are going to do their very best to eat you alive. No wonder the proclamation begins with these words, behold, Jesus says, behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of the wolves. But remember who it is that's sending you out. Remember who's sending you out right now. It's not Pastor Allen who's sending you out. It's not going to be Pastor John who's sending you out. It won't even be your principal in 2 and 3 days from now. When you're at your high school graduation, some of you have already graduated from college and had your services. It's not even those individuals. It is actually Jesus, the Good Shepherd, who is sending you out. And let me tell you what the Good Shepherd does. He looks out for His sheep. He watches over us. He protects us. He knows who His sheep are. And He says in His word, He will never leave you. He will never forsake you. That's why you need to understand that you're on mission for God, but understand also that wolves will be around you. Find comfort in knowing that Jesus is with you always, because there will always be wolves out in the world ready to eat your faith in Christ Jesus. Turn you away from the faith. I have a brand new grand dog. Brand new grand dog. And I got this dog through our daughter, Haley. And it's a German Shepherd, and her name is Nellie. And if you want to follow her, she has her own Instagram handle. Okay? Nellie, @Nellie _ the G-Shep. All right, so if you want to follow that, you can do that. But she came a few weeks ago, and it was her first time, and she's still a puppy. I think she's 11 weeks old or so, something like that. So she was here a couple of weeks ago, and she was not even 11 years old. But it was interesting what I watched in this German Shepherd. This German Shepherd gets out in our fenced-in backyard, and you know what I watch her do? At times, she'll just be walking around and looks very clumsy at times. And then at other times, though, she will get down and prowl like a wolf. Have you ever seen dogs do that? Certain dogs, and a German Shepherd is certainly one of those dogs, that will get down and will prowl very low to the ground. And you know why they do that? Because they don't want their prey that they are sneaking up on to see them. That's one of the things you need to be aware of, is that everything may look like it's all good and it's all well at times, but understand the Bible says that your adversary is actually even more than a wolf. He is like a roaring lion. And he is seeking to and fro, seeking whom he may devour. There's something interesting about wolves. My oldest daughter graduated from NC State, and so she's a wolf packer. And there's interesting about wolves. They travel in packs. And I think that's another reason that Jesus wanted to say to each of us today, I'm sending you out among wolves. And the reason being is because it's very easy to get trapped when you get into big groups. It's very hard sometimes to continue to live your faith in Jesus Christ. And that's why you need to remember that Jesus is the Good Shepherd, and He's there for you. And you need to remember this. You need to hold on to the fact that that's why we as sheep need to remain close to the Good Shepherd, Jesus Christ. We need to remember that we need to stay close to the pen, which is His church, as we move out into new seasons of life. Class of 2020, never forget Jesus is sending you out among wolves. But I want to spend my remaining moments with you today reminding you of the importance of combining being wise as a serpent with being harmless as a dove. What an oxymoron. Think about it. Wolves and doves. They really doesn't seem like there would be anything that would bring those two together. And yet Jesus blends them. And He says to those He is about to send out, He's transitioning. He's about to move them out into the world. He says, you need to take my advice, and you need to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Class of 2020, you are to be wise as serpents. You know what makes a serpent wise? And I've often wondered what it is. And I'm sure there's many other things, but here's one of them. What makes serpents wise is that snakes know how to shed their skin when a season is over. Snakes know how to shed a certain skin when that season is over. You won't find a snake trying to necessarily drag around its shedded skin behind it and pull it with it. You will find that snakes know how to let go of everything that has outlived its usefulness. Snakes shed their skin because unless they do, they can't continue to grow. So snakes instinctively know when to transition out of one season and into another. I have found that there are a lot of students that never make the transition from high school into adulthood life. I have found that there are a lot of students that pick up bad habits in high school, and they carry those habits throughout their lives. And it ends up causing them pain and their family pain, and it ends up short-circuiting the plans that they had for their lives. I'm sure, and you know it, probably know them as well, but there are individuals who pick up bad habits in college. And when they pick those bad habits up in college, they can't seem to ever let them go. And so they spend the next 30 years of their life continuing to try and live in college, continuing to try and live the collegiate life. So they spend their time drinking alcohol and getting drunk and partying, thinking that, oh, I can just still live this life. And it misses the responsibility, and it misses the point of what Jesus said. He said, I am sending you out on mission. You've got a mission. Yes, enjoy life, but let go of habits that you have perhaps picked up in high school or college. Because if you don't, they will short-circuit the plans that you've made and the purposes that God has designed for you. Shedding the skin is something that a serpent does. It's very wise. Eventually, a snake's skin reaches a point where further growth is not possible. And when that occurs, a new layer of skin begins to form underneath that one. And as soon as it's complete, the old skin peels away, and you've seen it, leaving behind this snake-shaped shell. You know what else it leaves along with it? Any parasites that may have attached to it. There are times in our lives where things, parasites, sin gets attached to our lives. This is a time for new beginnings. This is a time to shed those skins and move into a new season. Why? Because if you don't, look what happens. It inhibits the snake. It prevents it from growing any further. When a snake has trouble shedding its skin, the sheds can accumulate, and this can lead to many problems, especially around the eyes. And if a snake retains multiple, what they call eye caps, from previous sheds, it can lead to blindness. And in nature, a blind snake is a dead snake. And in most cases, problematic sheds are due to a lack of moisture or dehydration. The Bible tells us something. The Bible reminds us that we are to drink from the living waters of God. We're to stay hydrated. We're to stay hydrated in the Word of God. We're to stay hydrated in the house of God. That's the encouraging thing that I want to say to you. I know when you get out there, you're about, especially those of you who are in high school, you're about to get out there and think, I have no need for God anymore, or at least I can put him on the back burner. I don't need God anymore. I don't need the church anymore. Can I share something with you? There will never be a day when you will not need God. The Bible says, in him you live and you move and you have your being. And the moment that you think you don't need God is the moment that you are in for a rude awakening. See, snakes, if they're not careful, they can become blind. They can continue to carry parasites if they don't shed past seasons in their life that are not helpful to them anymore. Class of 2020, never forget that Jesus says, be as wise as serpents. Class of 2020, finally, you're to be harmless as doves. Jesus knew he was sending his followers into hostile territory. As Christians, I want to say this to you and everyone listening. We can't afford to be so idealistic and so altruistic that we lose touch with reality. We live in a fallen world. The great news is Jesus Christ has overcome the world. But we must remember that we still live in a fallen world, and even while we reach out in compassion, we need to stay on guard. It's not unchristian to be cautious and realistic. And this is why Jesus advises his followers to combine being wise as serpents with being harmless as doves. We are all right now aware of the global upheaval that is currently around us. Not only globally, but here in the United States of America. And many of us don't even realize it because we are so America-centric right now and focused on what's happening here. But there are actually other nations who are battling issues at this very moment. Actually, nations that are battling each other, and if things didn't get better, would eventually lead to war. But many of us are not even paying attention to it right now. We know that the world is in an upheaval at this very moment. We are also aware that for the most part, each of us wants to be on the side of justice, and that reform at times is absolutely necessary. By nature, we want to be on the side of compassion. And we want everyone to know it, that we are compassionate. So we often post to social media in warp speed because we don't want to look or seem insensitive. And you know what? That's commendable. Because we are real. We are compassionate. We are people that care. But I also want to say to you that in many cases, that the Twitterverse is filled with more with raw emotion than deep reflection. And it's often to the detriment of the universe. However, I found the following wisdom very helpful this week, and I thought I'd share it with you. Because as you walk out of here, it might be very helpful. This was posted in the last 24 hours. It was posted by an assistant professor of New Testament theology at the Evangelical Wheaton College. His name is Dr. Esau McCauley, PhD, who is also an Anglican priest, who also has been published in the Washington Post and the New York Times, and who is also an African American. And he tweeted these wise words this week. He said, and I quote, "It's okay not to have a strong opinion about a nuanced policy issue that you learned about 48 hours ago. It's fine to read and think and reflect." Did you hear his words? He said, it's fine to read and to think and reflect on issues rather than trying to respond to them often in warp speed, trying to make solutions in warp speed. Read, think, reflect, and I would even add this, pray. I think this is an example of what Jesus means by combining being wise as serpents with being harmless as doves. Cultural analyst, author, and Australian pastor Mark Sayers cautions us on the danger of oversimplistic solutions as they appear in our internet and social media feeds. I'm going to read you a long quote, but I want you to pay attention. Because if you will listen to it, I think that every one of us in this room will recognize that this is what's happening today. And it's a word of caution. It's actually Jesus speaking words of wisdom about being harmless as doves, but also being wise as serpents. And listen to what he says. I quote, "Our profit-driven news cycles are designed to follow an entertaining Hollywood thread." Here's the thread and here's the cycle. Crisis, intervention, struggle, resolution. Crisis, intervention, struggle, and resolution. How many of you know that Hollywood does a good job of solving problems in 30 minutes? Yeah. How many of you know, and if they're really good, they kind of stretch it out for an hour, and it's like everything's solved in an hour. That's the way of Hollywood, and that's the way of news cycles as well. News has picked up on that, and they want to try to do that, bring out the crisis. And they want to try to bring intervention and struggle and resolution. But he goes on to say, however, our networked age reveals a world in which multiple events happen at once, which bounce off each other, and they fuse, and they change form. In the face of such expanding complexity, oversimplistic solutions are tempting. But the wisest path, notice what he says, but the wisest path is found through discernment, nuance, patience, and a humble acceptance that there are few easy answers in a globalized, networked world. An off-ramp from this wise path can be found online. Online seems to offer us an insight into what others are thinking about this complex and confusing world. We swap out the failing narrative of the news cycle for the more dynamic network consensus we find on social media, which appears to reveal to us the true mood of the world. But Sayers goes on to say, however, the trending topics and hashtags of social media often obscure more than they reveal. They are even more manufactured than the legacy mass media's news cycle, reflecting back to an amalgam of our own preferences and biases harvested by algorithms and rich with competing agendas driven by a legion of actors, bots, attention-hungry celebs, governments, political platforms, clickbait profiteers, and random individuals. For fleeting moments like a wave cresting, he says, these disparate forces seem to coalesce us into a network consensus, appearing to offer us clairvoyance into the mood of the moment. Yet because the internet is a complex and dynamic network, its consensus can change in the blink of an eye. One can find themselves one day secure in social consensus and the next day canceled. Thus, such an attempt to read the world and gauge public mood requires total dedication. We must continually sit in the crow's nest, as it were, of a ship, anxiously scanning the horizon for changes in the digital zeitgeist. Zeitgeist, the German word for the spirit of the times. The totality of such a continuous surveillance of the online mood can create a trap where we mistake this world, this online world, for the real world and find ourselves repeatedly sideswiped by more accurate barometers of public opinion, such as electoral results. In other words, what seemed like the public was only a silo. I know that was complex, but what was Sayers saying here? He was saying, be wise as serpents and beware of the danger of oversimplistic solutions as they appear on our internet and social media feeds. Back in 2007, there was a strange story that ran in the Logan County, Illinois newspaper. The article said that about 7:15 a.m. one morning, that a man named Cody Rutz stole an Illinois Department of Transportation truck and fled from police southbound on Illinois 121. And the police lost sight of him near Mount Pulaski. And a short time later, the truck overturned between Mount Pulaski and Latham. And a man who saw the crash, watch this, pulled over to help. And when he did so, Rutz stole his 2006 Nissan and took off northbound on Illinois 121 toward Lincoln. Police pursued him, and eventually he collided with an Illinois police car at 8 a.m. He was arrested, and the police learned that he had stolen and abandoned or wrecked a total of 4 cars, 2 of them from Good Samaritans who stopped to help him. What's the point of that story? The point of that story is Jesus tells us what? To be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. A father was having a conversation with his daughter because his daughter often gave money to people who were homeless and had homeless signs beside the road. Nothing wrong with that, obviously. But he had to warn her about how dangerous it was to roll down her window and hand money to a stranger who just might attempt a carjacking. Class of 2020, I know you want to bring well-being to our world. You have been called to bring well-being to our world. We have called to love our neighbor. We have called to be harmless as doves. But even Jesus said that we must combine being harmless as doves with being wise as serpents. So here's how you can have the rare combination of being wise as a serpent as well as being harmless as a dove. It's found in James 1 and 5 as we close. The Bible says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God who gives liberally. Ask God. Pray for wisdom. Say, God, what do I need to do in this particular circumstance? What should I do? How should I handle this? Lord, all the things that are going around in the world, how should I respond? Should I respond? Should I respond on social media or not? Think about those things. Ask God, give me wisdom. Think through, just as our brother said from Wheaton College, think through, reflect. It is okay not to have a solution to the problem within 48 hours of you not even knowing there was a problem. So I encourage you, each of you graduates, high school and college, you are in a transition stage. And I say to you, don't cry because it's over, but smile because it happened. And keep on moving. I close with this story today. My family and I lived in Asia for a number of years. And one of the things that's unique about Asia, especially when you get into the very places that are a little more modern, a little more contemporary, is they actually have malls. And where our malls spread out like this, their malls go straight up in the air. And their malls can be as tall as 10 to 12 stories. And they have escalators that are just going up and down. And our family had to shop there. And the interesting thing about their malls is that's where you found everything. That's where you bought everything. I mean, you didn't just buy, your clothes there or go and get cell phone service. What you did while you were there was you also bought your groceries. You did grocery shopping. You bought your cars in the mall. You did all kinds of things. Anything you needed or needed to purchase, you could purchase in an Asian mall. Because that's the way that system works. And my wife and I and our girls, Debbie, Haley, and Heidi, what's interesting is that we would go and we would be going up these escalators and we'd have our hands full. And everybody would have their hands full of stuff. And we would be on the escalators. And we were about to make our way. It was never failed. When we were about to make our way home, we would be going down the escalator with everything in our hands, trying to get down and get out to our car. And inevitably, there would always be one man or one woman who, when they got off the escalator, would stop right at the end of the escalator and start looking around. And meanwhile, there are literally dozens and dozens and dozens of people that are on the escalator behind them. And we are all with our bags in hand trying to dodge and not fall over this individual. People are trying to do fancy steps. What's the moral of this story? The moral of this story is this: just because something comes to an end, don't stop moving. Just because something comes to an end, don't stop moving. You are in a season of transition right now. Class of 2020, this season of your life, this season has come to an end. But don't stop moving, because you have been built by God for this moment. And can everyone in the congregation today say, amen?